In the black void between stars, where vox echoes of dying systems drift like ghosts, a name stirs ancient fear. Not the fear born of ignorance or superstition, but the cold, informed terror of those who know what walks the galaxy's bleeding edge. Huron Blackheart, the Tyrant of Badab, the Lord of the Maelstrom. You have heard his name whispered by naval officers huddled around weak lumen globes scrawled into scorched astropathic slates, or roared defiantly by traitor lords in the eye of terror. But names are only the husk of legacy. And if you are to understand Huron Blackheart, truly understand the monster he became, you must return to where the rot first set in. You must turn to the first page of a forbidden chronicle, not one penned in ink, but in blood, treachery, and the dying cries of loyal sons. This is no tale of simple rebellion, no fleeting coup by a petty warlord. It is the long, festering fall of a hero who was once humanity's guardian, now the architect of piracy, genocide, and galactic chaos. It is a story of how greatness can become ruin, and how ruin can rise again, more dangerous than ever. Let the record begin. Lufgt Huron. That was his name once. Remember it, for you will not hear it again for long. Born on the frontier, forged in the fires of Imperial war, he rose within the Astral Claws, not through lineage but merit. Of that, even his enemies agree. He was a commander of brilliance, a warrior of unmatched ferocity, and a tactician who saw warfare not as a ritual to be followed, but a game to be mastered. Many chapters preach the Codex Astartes as dogma. Huron, he saw it as a suggestion. The Codex is a cage for the dull, he once said during a campaign in the Ribos Nebula. We were not bred to obey, we were bred to win. He won indeed. Campaign after campaign, the Astral Claws, his Astral Claws, drove back orcs, tyrannids, and the creeping tendrils of chaos itself. While Terra slept comfortably behind a veil of stars, Huron stood against the night, and he was not thanked. The Maelstrom Zone, a cursed slice of the segmentum ultima, forever bordering the warp maelstrom that belched horror into real space. This was Huron's crucible. Here, where the Emperor's light flickered, he became not just a chapter master, but the protector of a dozen worlds. As the administratum faltered, as Arbite's patrols grew sparse, and as sector command grew complacent, it was Huron who kept the peace. Not through diplomacy, not through compromise, through strength. He demanded tithes from nearby worlds, but used them. He conscripted planetary militias, but trained them. He enforced rule, but kept order. In the Maelstrom Zone, Imperial authority was weak. Lufgt Huron was not, and so the people called him Tyrant. Not in fear at first, but in awe. It was a name spoken with admiration, with reverence. They did not say, "The Emperor protects" in Badab. They said, "Huron protects." That, perhaps, was the beginning. You see, no great fall begins with wickedness. It begins with pride. Huron believed the Imperium had abandoned its own frontier, that its bureaucracy was a blight, its tithe drones parasites, its admirals cowards. He was not entirely wrong. But where others saw these truths and endured them, Huron raged. He saw his chapter stretched thin across too many war zones, his pleas for reinforcements ignored, his triumphs forgotten. He watched as the administratum demanded more gene seed, more men, more resources, yet offered nothing in return. What did Terra know of the Maelstrom? What did they sacrifice? Nothing. But he sacrificed everything. Brother after brother in battles the High Lords would never even record. He paid the price in blood, and when he asked for aid, they sent scribes. "Let them choke on parchment," he snarled during one audit, tearing apart a tithe directive before his council. "If the High Lords want my loyalty, they can come earn it themselves." This was not the rant of a madman. Not yet. This was the bitterness of a man who had given everything and been repaid with suspicion. And so Huron stopped giving. He hoarded the gene seed of fallen brothers, refusing the administratum's requisition. He redirected tithes to fortify his own war efforts. He appointed governors, raised levies, reshaped the Badab sector, not in the emperor's image, but in his own. At first, these acts were hidden, then justified, then enforced. The Imperium does not govern here, he told his allies. We do, and we must. Was he wrong? You must ask yourself before you condemn him, because in those years the Maelstrom quieted, the Xenos retreated, the pirates fled. Under Huron's iron rule, the sector prospered as much as any Imperial fringe can. And that, above all else, is the tragedy. He was good at it. Too good. He began to believe not just that he should lead, but that he was meant to. That his judgment was superior to the distant, decaying corpse lords of Terra. That only he had the will to save humanity from itself. And so the legend twisted. The hero of Badab became the monarch of Badab. He raised a palace, the Palace of Thorns, black iron and ceramite, defiant against the stars. He filled it with councils and acolytes, not priests of the ecclesiarchy, but warriors loyal only to him. The chapter cults of the Astral Claws shifted ever so slightly, not from faith to heresy, but from faith to Huron. The Emperor gave me his strength, he once said, but he does not wield it. I do. There it is. The moment where pride tips into hubris, where duty becomes doctrine, where loyalty becomes leash. The Terran records began to notice then. Requests turned to reprimands, reprimands turned to threats, and the name Lufgt Huron began appearing in the margins of Ordo Hereticus files. Quietly, carefully, but ominously. He did not flinch. Let them come, he said, standing on the parapets of the Palace of Thorns. Let them bring their decrees, their inquisitors, their fleets. I do not kneel. I do not break. They would come. But not yet, for now the tyrant ruled, and the tyrant believed that the Imperium had lost its way, that he alone could save it, that he alone had the will. This was not madness, not yet. But it was prophecy, and like all prophecies in this age of ruin, it would be fulfilled not in salvation, but in fire. Thus begins the tale of Huron Blackheart, not with chaos, not with blood, but with a man who loved the Imperium too much to obey it, a man who dared to lead, and found only betrayal. You ask how monsters are born? They are made, they are forgotten, and then they return. There was a time when Lufgt Huron was not a tyrant, not a warlord, not a monster. There was a time when he stood at the right hand of the Emperor's will, when his armor gleamed silver and blue in the light of righteous purpose, and his voice, though proud, swore only to safeguard humanity. Before the blood, before the betrayal, before the Hamadryah ever perched upon his shoulder, Lufgt Huron was a son of the Imperium, and by the throne he was one of its finest. You must understand, Huron was not born into villainy. He was forged, temper by temper, in the crucibles of fire and war, like any son of the Adeptus Astartes. He rose not because he coveted power, but because he earned it. And like all tragedies worth telling, his began with greatness. Let us return now to the days before the fall, before Badab burned, to the battlefields where Lufgt Huron made his name, the Astral Claws, a chapter not often mentioned in the hallowed annals of Imperial history now, their name excised, their heraldry erased, their records sealed. But once they were among the boldest of the Imperium's sentinels, birthed during the 35th millennium from unknown gene stock, though many suspect Raven Guard lineage. The Astral Claws were tasked with safeguarding the border worlds surrounding the Maelstrom, that perpetual wound in real space where the warp spills like poisoned blood into the stars. It was a death sentence disguised as duty. The Maelstrom is not a war zone. It is every war zone all at once. In its spirals crawl orcs, dark Eldar, heretics, demon cults, and things too ancient for names. Many chapters stationed in the region suffered attrition so steep they ceased to exist within generations. But the Astral Claws did not. Under Huron, they thrived. Lufgt Huron first distinguished himself during the Rebos Crusade, a grinding war against a resurgent Eldar pirate enclave in the border systems. At the time, he was a mere battle brother, a line warrior. No command, no favors, just a bolter, a blade, and a will like iron. It was during the siege of Vareth's Hollow that his name first rang through the voxnet of the Astral Claws. An entire scout detachment was ambushed by Xenos webway trickery, hallucinogenic fields, psychic illusions, and phantom terrain. The squad broke. Voices screamed through comms as Eldar blades carved through ceramite. Huron did not scream. He did not run. He closed his eyes, centered himself in the Emperor's light, and when he opened them, the hallucinations cleared. Some say it was his gene seed's resilience. Others whisper darker things, that he was already touched by the warp. But whatever the truth, Huron stood alone amidst a slaughter, and with nothing but a combat blade, he slew the Eldar warlock responsible. When his brothers regrouped, they found Huron standing atop a cairn of corpses, cloak soaked in alien ichor, eyes clear. From that day, his rise was meteoric. By the time of the Zenroth suppression, Huron had been given command of a company. By the end of the Goraidan offensive, he commanded the entire Fourth. In every campaign, his tactics evolved: merciless precision, unorthodox strategies, the use of decoys and false signals to confuse the enemy. He never fought fair, because war to Huron was not a test of honor. It was a calculation, and he never lost the equation. His battlefield philosophies grew infamous. While many chapters bled in drawn-out attrition wars, Huron preferred to break the enemy's will before the battle began. He'd block supply lines, deploy misinformation, orchestrate a dozen minor skirmishes to draw attention away from his true thrust. And when the moment came, he struck like a spear through the heart. These were not the tactics of a Codex purist. The Ultramarines viewed him with disdain. But the results, they could not argue with results. In 697 M41, after the death of Chapter Master Voskar in the Amunet Rift ambush, the Astral Claws elected a new leader. Not the oldest, not the most senior. Lufgt Huron. He accepted the mantle not with humility, but with a quiet certainty. It was a role he had already been preparing for. With the rank of Chapter Master came a second title, Protector of the Maelstrom Zone. You must remember, this was no hollow honorific. The Maelstrom Zone included a dozen worlds at the edge of sanity. The warp storm surged unpredictably, distorting time and space. Many Imperial ships were lost before they even arrived. Local PDF forces were often corrupted, broken, or extinct. It was a region abandoned by the Imperium in all but name. And now it was Huron's to command. He set to work immediately. Planetary governors were summoned to Badab Primaris, the Astral Claws' homeworld, for enforced treaties. Defense agreements were signed under the threat of orbital bombardment. Non-compliant systems were blockaded, then raided. And from this brutal diplomacy emerged a strange order. The Maelstrom Zone began to stabilize. Pirate activity dropped. Trade resumed. Entire subsectors fell into a rhythm of enforced peace. Not out of love for the Emperor, but fear of Huron. It was effective, efficient, and deeply concerning. The Administratum took note. Reports from rogue traders began to speak of a chapter master who referred to himself as Lord Protector, who levied planetary taxes without sector command oversight, who fielded militia armies not bound to the Munitorum. But as usual, Terra's gaze moved slowly, too slowly, and in the meantime, Huron's ambitions grew. He was not content to merely protect the Maelstrom's border. He wanted to reshape it. Under his direction, the Astral Claws expanded their recruitment drastically. More scouts, more gene seed implantation. Huron skirted the limit imposed by Imperial law. A chapter was supposed to maintain roughly 1,000 Astartes, but Huron pushed for more, much more. He built a shadow fleet, vessels of obscure registry, crewed by void-born scum and oath-sworn mercenaries. He funded privateers who acted as his eyes and ears across the region. He constructed hidden supply depots in asteroid belts, weapon caches in derelict moons, black sites where forbidden technologies were tested. He was building something greater than a chapter, a kingdom. The Astral Claws were no longer just a space marine chapter. They were the military wing of an emerging empire. The livery of Badab Primaris flew from star forts, trade ports, mining colonies. Huron's word, not imperial decree, was law, and his warriors followed him not because of duty, but because of belief. Belief that their lord saw farther, struck harder, and understood what the Imperium had forgotten. That strength is order. Some began to whisper of him in reverent tones, not as a commander, but as a savior, the man who brought light to the stars abandoned by Terra. He allowed those whispers to grow. He encouraged them. But within Huron, something began to twist. Something subtle. Success emboldened him. Loyalty intoxicated him. And then came the moment when he walked the battlements of the Palace of Thorns, looked upon the stars of his domain, and said, perhaps only to himself, "This is what the Imperium could have been. This is what I shall make it become." And in that moment, a seed was planted, a seed of destiny, a seed of rebellion. But not yet, for now he was still Huron, still the brilliant commander, still the Lion of Badab. But the claws had begun to unsheathe, and the stars, ever watchful, would soon burn. There is a moment in every tragedy when the hero's path becomes irreversible, not with fire, not with blood, but with the quiet conviction that he and he alone must remake the world. For Lufgt Huron, that moment did not come at the tip of a loyalist bolter or beneath the blade of a heretic god. It came in silence as he stood alone on the spire of the Palace of Thorns, gazing out over the fire-washed sky of Badab Primaris, and whispered to no one, "The Imperium has no heart. Very well, I shall give it mine." And with that, the last embers of faith were snuffed out. Not by the ruinous powers, not by demon whispers, but by pride, cold, searing, and absolute. Thus, the Protector became the Tyrant. From orbit, Badab Primaris was a jewel of industry, a world of massive manufactoria, geothermal cities, and basalt mountains crowned with imperial spires. But its true power lay not in beauty, but in obedience. Every soul on Badab, from the forged slaves to the high nobles of the ruling houses, bent the knee to one master, Lufgt Huron. He had ruled for decades now, not merely as chapter master of the Astral Claws, but as planetary sovereign, overlord of dozens of vassal systems. The Imperium still counted Badab as compliant, loyal even, but that was an illusion. For the Administratum, distance always bred complacency. As long as tithes trickled in and warp lanes remained navigable, they saw no cause for concern. Huron, meanwhile, was transforming Badab into something else entirely. It began subtly. Reforms, he called them, adjustments to tithe schedules, the centralization of sectoral defense forces under Astral Claw supervision. The creation of the Maelstrom Warders, a loose coalition of smaller Astartes-aligned militias and chapter-trained PDF forces tasked with protecting outlying colonies. In public, these acts were cast as magnanimous gestures, a show of responsibility, but their effect was unmistakable. Huron was consolidating power. By 893 M41, all independent military forces within the Badab sector answered to him. Naval squadrons were seconded to his fleet command. Civilian governors deferred to his edicts. And while he still voiced loyalty to the emperor, his rhetoric had shifted. He no longer spoke of Terra as the heart of mankind, but as a relic, stagnant, decaying, irrelevant. The emperor gave us purpose, he once proclaimed to the sector assembly. But his throne is silent, his priests deaf. Out here, we fight not for him, but for survival. I will not let us die in obedience to fools. Those words were never reported. The scribes who recorded them were later reassigned or executed. In his private council, Huron grew more severe. He demanded absolute control over the gene seed stores of his chapter. Normally, all Space Marine chapters must submit periodic gene seed tithe to the Adeptus Terra, samples of their sacred legacy, ensuring both stability and oversight. Huron halted the shipments. When questioned, he offered excuses: losses to piracy, warp storms, administrative delays. They were lies. In truth, Huron was expanding the Astral Claws beyond what was allowed. 10 companies were the limit decreed by the Codex Astartes. He had 15. Some whispered 20. Entire recruitment cadres operated in secret on the moons of Badab, churning out new Astartes faster than any chapter had since the days of the Great Crusade. He was building a private legion. But for what? The answer lay not just in ambition, but in paranoia. Huron believed the Imperium would come for him. That Terra, ever fearful of power it did not command, would see his strength and seek to destroy it. Whether this was a prophetic insight or the beginning of madness, none can say. But it ruled his thoughts. He saw spies in every envoy, saboteurs in every mechanicum emissary. When an Adeptus Ministorum delegation arrived to inspect the cathedral of the God Emperor, Huron had them detained and questioned under pain. They were later found guilty of heresy by obfuscation and executed. Even his inner circle began to fracture. Chapter captains who questioned his directives were demoted, exiled, or worse. The Librarius, the chapter's psychic order, was gutted after several librarians warned of shadows gathering around their master's aura. One, librarian Esteban Kai, tried to leave Badab. His Thunderhawk never reached orbit. The Palace of Thorns became a place of whispered dread. What once had been a bastion of honor was now a fortress of suspicion, locked down by protocol and watched by servitor wards, programmed to report even idle chatter. And amidst all this, Huron brooded. The true turning point came in 897 M41. The Administratum, finally alerted by conflicting records and sector anomalies, dispatched a tithe inspection fleet to Badab. 3 capital ships, including the Oratio Divinorum, a vessel bearing ecclesiarchal authority, entered the system with full sanction to demand answers. They were met with silence, no docking permissions, no orbital greetings, no astropathic return messages. Then, without warning, the Astral Claws opened fire. It was swift, surgical, a display of power and resolve. In less than 6 hours, all 3 Imperial ships were destroyed. No survivors, no debris left drifting. Every trace of the incident was scrubbed by the corsair techs operating under Huron's command. It was an act not just of rebellion, but of finality. From that moment, there could be no return. Huron had declared, in the only language the Imperium understands, that he would not be ruled. To his followers, he addressed the moment with chilling clarity. In the grand forum of the warders, his hand-picked vassal rulers, governors, and mercenary lords, he stood upon the obsidian dais and spoke. The Imperium demands tithes but sends no aid. It claims dominion but leaves our borders to rot. It calls us traitors because we do what it cannot. I say this, the Imperium is no longer fit to rule us. We are not rebels. We are sovereign. There was silence. Then 100 voices cried allegiance. That night, the warders repainted their banners. They struck the aquila from their seals. They burned the edicts of the High Lords. And across the stars of the Badab sector, hundreds of beacons lit the void in crimson flame. A new order had been born, but sovereignty is a blade with two edges. While the vassals cheered, the Imperium stirred. The Segmentum Command demanded explanations. When none came, they mobilized strike teams. The Ordo Hereticus activated sleeper agents within Badab. And in the void lanes surrounding the Maelstrom, battle fleet elements began to gather. Huron knew what was coming. He welcomed it. Not because he believed he could win, but because he believed he was right. He ordered the activation of hidden defenses, automated weapon platforms camouflaged in asteroid belts, orbital mines seeded along warp routes, listening arrays to track fleet movements. Every preparation had been made long ago. The trap was already built. And above the throne upon which he now sat, no longer a chapter master, but a king in all but name, he hung a new banner. It bore no aquila, no sigil of the Imperium, only a crimson claw upon a field of black. The sigil of a tyrant, the sigil of Lufgt Huron, ruler of Badab, Lord Protector of the Maelstrom Zone. Tyrant, they would call him. He accepted it gladly, because to him tyranny was only what power looked like when it refused to apologize. Thus the stage was set. The Imperium would come, and Huron, seated upon his throne of defiance, would meet them, not as a servant begging forgiveness, but as a sovereign demanding recognition. The galaxy would burn to decide who was right. And Huron Blackheart, he was ready. It is said that betrayal is not a single act, but a chain of choices, forged link by link until the weight becomes inescapable. By the time the Imperium turned its gaze fully upon Badab, Lufgt Huron had already crossed the Rubicon, not with a war cry, but with a silence that screamed defiance. This chapter is not about the start of a war. It is about a choice, a single, final choice, when a man who once fought for the Emperor turned his back, not out of desperation, nor corruption, but because he believed the Emperor had turned his back first. By the final years of the 41st millennium's 9th century, the Badab sector was a powder keg, and Huron held the match. He had spent decades building his power. Fortresses carved into asteroid fields, orbital platforms hidden within warp-shrouded eddies, a fleet swollen with captured and retrofitted vessels, their prows engraved with the claw sigil in place of the aquila. But most of all, he had rebuilt his chapter into something more. The Astral Claws were no longer one of 1,000 loyalist chapters. They had grown past the Codex Astartes limitations. They were no longer 10 companies. They were a war host. Their number swelled with rapid implantation protocols and gene seed replication techniques so secretive that even the Mechanicum dared not question them. And yet, it wasn't enough. Because across the stars, the Imperium had noticed. The first inquiry came in the form of parchment and politeness, a scribal communique from Segmentum Command requesting clarification on delayed gene seed tithes. Huron ignored it. The second came with more weight, an administratum audit team escorted by a minor rogue trader and guarded by an escort frigate. They never reached the surface. Their ship was lost to pirates. The third inquiry bore the seal of the Ordo Hereticus. That ship did land, but it never left. It was 9:01 when the moment came. An Imperial delegation arrived in the Badab system, official, armed, and righteous. They came not as diplomats, but as enforcers. 2 inquisitors, 3 Astra Militarum generals, a scribe cohort, and an entire battle group from the Firehawks chapter as escort. Their mission was simple: demand compliance. The demands were read aloud in the Palace of Thorns. Ties of gene seed were to be submitted immediately. The Maelstrom warders were to disband. Civilian planetary forces were to be restructured under Imperial naval oversight. And Huron himself was to travel to Kar Dunyash to explain his actions before the Segmentum court. The last line of the edict read, "Failure to comply will be seen as rebellion. Such actions carry the gravest of consequences." Huron stood at the edge of the throne platform while the edict was read, his expression inscrutable. The litanies of demand echoed across the obsidian chamber. The Firehawk's captain stood with hand resting on his weapon, a show of dominance. And then silence. Huron stepped forward, one hand behind his back, the other resting lightly on the pommel of his power axe. His voice, when it came, was calm, measured. "Tell me, Captain, did the Emperor give you the right to summon his sons as criminals?" The Firehawk opened his mouth, but Huron continued. "You call me a rebel, a usurper, and yet where were you when we bled? Where was your chapter when we held the line in the Adraxis Gulf? When we sacrificed 2 companies to hold the warp tide at Megia? When we buried our brothers on worlds that your precious High Lords did not even record?" He stepped closer. The delegation flinched. "Number You did not come here for justice. You came here to punish independence, to remind me that loyalty is not enough, that no matter how many victories we win, we are only ever subjects of your dying empire." He gestured to the soldiers. "You want my obedience. You want my warriors to kneel before men who've never seen war, who measure loyalty by paperwork and fear. But I am not a clerk. I am not a servant." He turned, walking back toward the throne. "Tell Terra this. I will not kneel. I will not surrender. I will not be judged by those who hid while I stood in fire." A pause. "If you want my soul, send stronger men." The Firehawks left the chamber in silence. They did not even make it to orbit. The skies over Badab turned red. From concealed hangars on the far side of the moon, Viel Secundus, squadrons of strike craft launched with surgical precision. The Imperial fleet, still in a holding pattern, was caught unprepared. The first salvo of torpedoes tore through the cruiser, glory of Enceladus. Secondary explosions crippled the troop transports. Boarding pods followed, filled with Astral Claws in black and silver, blades hungry for vengeance. Within hours, the delegation's ships were burning wrecks. Survivors were few. Those who lived were stripped of rank, interrogated, and dumped back into escape pods with a single message etched into their armor: "Badab is free." This was no longer a question of defiance. It was war. The Imperium responded with fury. Within days, Huron was declared excommunicate traitoris. The Astral Claws were to be erased, not censured, not corrected, erased. The Loyalist response came with fire and purity seals. The High Lords of Terra issued a sector-wide edict. All chapters within reach were to mobilize. The Badab War, though not yet named, had begun. And what did Huron do? He invited the fire. In a series of encrypted astropathic pulses, Huron sent calls to 3 other chapters. The Mantis Warriors. Known for their silent honor, their expertise in jungle and void warfare, and their long history of operating independently in the Segmentum Pacificus. The Executioners, savage oath-bound warriors, loyal to the codes of honor more ancient than the Imperium itself. And the Lamenters, the cursed sons of Sanguinius, valiant, tragic, and desperate to prove their worth after centuries of misfortune. Each had grievances, each had debts, each had tasted the Imperium's indifference. To each, Huron sent a message. We have not forsaken the Emperor. We have simply stopped waiting for his empire to remember us. The Mantis warriors answered first, then the executioners. The lamenters, though reluctant, finally followed. A pact was formed, not of heresy, but of independence. And so the Maelstrom warders were no longer just a defense pact, they were a coalition of secession. Their flags flew in defiance, but not in chaos. Not yet. This was not yet a chaos rebellion. No dark gods whispered here, no demonic rites. Not then. This was a war of principle, of pride. That is what makes it so tragic. Because the men who followed Huron, at first, truly believed they were still loyal. Loyal to the Emperor, if not the Imperium. Loyal to the spirit of the Astartes, if not the chain of command. But the moment the first loyalist blood was spilled in Badab's orbit, the line had been crossed. The purity seals burned. The names were struck from the rolls. Huron, once a hero, was now a traitor. And the war drums beat louder. Some say the warp began to whisper to Huron then, that the darkness saw his pride and offered its pact. But that comes later. For now, the man who was Lufgt Huron had made his choice. There was no turning back. No tribunal, no compromise, no retreat. He had declared war on the Imperium, and the Imperium would answer with bolter, with fire, and with unrelenting fury. But Huron was ready. In the depths of the Palace of Thorns, he donned his warplate, now darker, more brutal. He gathered his captains, and he spoke with a voice like thunder. They would brand us traitors for refusing the leash, so be it. Let them call us what they will. We do not ask permission to survive. Thus the first act ended, and the galaxy began to burn. The drums of war do not always thunder in the open. Sometimes they murmur behind closed doors, beating in the hearts of men who know that what they're about to do will shatter worlds. That empires, once cracked, never quite heal. That the first blood drawn in defiance becomes an unholy covenant, one that binds the soul forever. When the Badab War began, it did not roar, it seethed. It began in darkness, cloaked in silence and strategy, in the chill glow of tactical hololiths and secret star charts. While the Imperium declared Huron Blackheart a traitor, while sermons of his excommunication echoed from the pulpits of ecclesiarchal preachers, the Tyrant of Badab was already moving pieces across the board. And as always, he was 3 moves ahead. Make no mistake, Huron did not seek war with the Imperium in the manner of madmen or cultists. This was not the blind rage of a frothing traitor. This was cold preparation, the culmination of decades of foresight. For years, the Astral Claws had reshaped the Badab sector into a fortress. But fortresses can be broken. What Huron built next was more dangerous. A trap. The outer systems were rigged with layered defenses, minefields disguised as asteroid belts, orbital weapon platforms painted with the thermal signatures of derelicts, automated gun satellites that tracked warp signatures before they could be seen by conventional auspex. These weren't static walls. They were dynamic kill zones. Every corridor into the Badab sector was a coffin for the unprepared. And the first to learn that were the Firehawks. Driven by glory, perhaps eager to be the first to claim the tyrant's head, the Firehawks launched a rapid assault into the sector in 902 M41. Their chapter master, Stibor Lazarek, believed speed and fury would carry the day. He was wrong. Huron let them come. He gave no resistance at the perimeter. He invited them in. The Firehawks' strike cruisers passed the threshold into the Piraeus expanse, expecting immediate engagement. What they received was stillness. Too still. Then the trap closed. The first vessel to die was the Just Ascension. It struck a gravity mine that dragged it into the maw of a dormant asteroid, now a disguised weapons platform. Macro lances erupted from within the rock, reducing the cruiser to drifting slag. Seconds later, every vessel in the Firehawk's spearhead was hit with jamming signals. Communications severed, auspex blinded. They were flying blind. Then the boarding torpedoes came. Astral Claws in midnight armor tore through the hulls like sharks in bloodied water. These were not isolated strikes. They were coordinated, precise, executed with data fed from observation posts planted years in advance. By the time the Firehawks withdrew, they had lost 3 ships and hundreds of Astartes. Lazarek survived, but he never forgot. He would come to call Huron the spider in the maelstrom, a warlord who spun traps with the patience of ages. But Huron's goal wasn't just destruction, it was control. He didn't just want to win battles, he wanted to shape the war. And to do that, he needed to dictate where, how, and when it was fought. He used deniable assets, pirate fleets, mercenary bands, even manipulated Xenos, to strike Imperial supply lines, disrupt Navy deployments, and destabilize neighboring sectors. A Mechanicum Forge convoy en route to deliver replacement Titans to Forge, World Bionax vanished in a warp jump. An Arbit's precinct on Gloravant was found massacred, its evidence logs wiped clean. No proof, no witnesses, only whispers. Meanwhile, Huron's allies began to play their part. The Mantis warriors, masters of stealth and planetary warfare, melted into the jungle worlds of the outer systems. They didn't engage directly, not yet. Instead, they began a campaign of guerrilla interference, sabotaging beacons, crippling Vox relays, and assassinating forward Imperial survey teams before their presence could be confirmed. The executioners were slower to act, bound by ancient oaths and internal codes of honor. But when they moved, it was with violence that split planets open. Their first strike came against the Salamanders during the contested Battle of Angstrom 4. The executioners didn't send a warning or a herald, they sent axes. And the Lamenters, the most tragic players in this war, tried at first to act as peacekeepers, attempting to limit bloodshed, to negotiate. But fate is cruel, and loyalty means nothing in the fog of war. When the Lamenters took up arms to defend Badab's refugees from a zealous exorcists task force, they were declared traitors. In one moment, centuries of hard-earned redemption were gone. The galaxy would remember them as rebels once more. The Imperium, for all its size, is slow to react, but when it does, it reacts with fury. The Loyalist response was immense. 9 chapters were deployed within months, some old, some new. The Red Scorpions, proud sons of discipline and doctrine, were the first to assume command of the Loyalist coalition. The Minotaurs, blunt instruments of Imperial will, were unleashed without mercy. The Star Phantoms, Howling Griffins, Fire Angels, Nova Marines, Carcharodons, Salamanders, and Exorcists followed. They brought with them fleet groups, Mechanicus legions, Astra Militarum detachments, and the full authority of the Inquisition. The war that followed was not a straight line. It was a spiral into madness. The Loyalists launched a dozen assaults, only to find their landing zones sabotaged, their intel compromised, their reinforcements misdirected. For every fortress they razed, another 3 emerged elsewhere. It was a war of attrition against a foe who had spent a generation preparing. Huron's fleets began striking beyond the war zone, hitting resupply worlds, diverting Forge world output, even bribing rogue navigators to mislead the Imperium's own ships. He played the long game, knowing that while he could not outlast the Imperium forever, he could make them bleed until the cost of victory became unbearable. And through it all, he remained unseen. While his captains led raids and allies waged battles, Huron stayed in the shadows, directing from afar. Not cowardice, control. Every move, every counter-move, fed into his vision. Every loss was calculated, every victory sharpened. The war didn't consume him, he fed on it. One of the most infamous moments of the early war came during the siege of Cairo's Forge, a mechanicum bastion on the edge of the Badab conflict zone. The Red Scorpions launched a textbook planetary invasion. 3 companies, Titan support, orbital superiority. They expected a frontal defense. What they received was hell. Mantis warriors had booby-trapped the entire upper hemisphere. When the first Thunderhawks landed, the tectonic stabilizers were detonated remotely. Entire sections of the Manufactorum world collapsed into lava-choked crevices. Volcanoes, not native to the planet, erupted, seeded with geocharges months earlier. Over half the invading force perished before they fired a shot, and in the wreckage the Astral Claws struck, not to conquer, but to send a message. Still, for all their cunning, the rebels were not invincible. The loyalist war machine began to adapt. The Red Scorpions, under the stoic leadership of Lord High Commander Karab Colin, instituted counterintelligence protocols, multi-front feints, and scorched void tactics. He gave the tyrant something he rarely faced, discipline equal to his own. By the end of the second year, the Loyalists had taken 3 key systems, isolated Lamenter strongholds, and forced the Executioners into a bloody withdrawal on Chimera. But at what cost? Thousands of Space Marines dead, dozens of warships lost, civilian casualties uncountable, entire sectors scorched to prevent them from becoming staging grounds. This was no longer a war of rebels and loyalists. It was a war of ideologies, and neither side could afford to lose. Meanwhile, deep in the Palace of Thorns, Huron watched the reports. His hands, scarred from battle, rested on the hilt of his axe, his expression unreadable. The Hamadria, his strange warp familiar, hissed quietly on his shoulder, whispering things no mortal ear could endure. But Huron said nothing, until one of his captains, bold, brash, too young, asked the question, "My lord, we've drawn blood. When do we strike the heart?" And Huron, without turning, replied, "The heart is not where you stab first. You let it beat. You let it bleed. You let it believe it still commands the body." Then he smiled, "And then you show it. It never did." Thus the Badab War began, not as a clash of armies, but a dance of shadows, traps, and conviction. And at the center of it all, not a mindless warlord, but a tactician, a philosopher, a tyrant, and above all else, a patient predator. In the grand theater of war, loyalty is never what it seems. It is not the banners we fly, nor the oaths we chant in echoing halls. It is not forged in the ceremonies of brotherhood or the painted heraldry of our armor. Loyalty is a shadow cast by purpose, and when that purpose begins to fracture, so too does the shadow. The Badab War, for all its tactical brilliance and void-split carnage, was never merely a war of ships and sieges. It was a war of beliefs, and belief, when strained, has a sound, a cracking, splintering groan as ancient oaths unravel. This is the chapter where those oaths broke. This is where the tyrant's dream began to bleed, not from a blade, but from the hearts of his allies. From the outset, Huron Blackheart did not fight alone. He was the spark, yes, but not the fire. That blaze was fanned by 3 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, each unique, each wounded in their own way, each with a reason to follow him down the dark spiral of rebellion. The Mantis warriors, lithe masters of stealth and ambush, once praised for their surgical strikes in the jungles of Grendel's Moon and the orbital labyrinths of Vartok Reach, they had long chafed under the suffocating rituals of the Codex Astartes. They found in Huron a kindred spirit, someone who respected results over dogma. The executioners, grim sons of the 7th Legion's traditions, bound not to terror but to honor. Their loyalty was not given freely, but earned through ancient rites and blood duels. They had once stood shoulder to shoulder with the Astral Claws in battles that the Imperium had forgotten. And they remembered Huron's name not as a tyrant, but as a brother in war. And then the Lamenters. Ah, the Lamenters, the cursed chapter. Bearers of the Black Rage, martyrs of 1,000 tragedies. They had never known the Emperor's favor, only his silence. When they reached out to the High Lords for aid after the Grief Crusade, they were met with bureaucracy and suspicion. When they offered themselves to Huron's cause, they did so not out of hatred, but because, for the first time in centuries, someone listened. For a time, these four formed the Iron Ring around the Maelstrom. The Maelstrom Warders, as Huron named them. A bulwark of independent strength, not traitors. Not yet, but war changes everything, and when the storm truly hit, it began to pull that ring apart. The first cracks appeared not on the battlefield, but in the silence between. After the Battle of Huron's Teeth, where a combined force of Lamenters and Astral Claws slaughtered a convoy of loyalist Nova Marines and Mechanicus adepts, there was no celebration. Lamenter Captain Malakim Foros, known for his composure and dignity, personally requested an audience with Huron. Witnesses say the exchange was quiet, cold. Foros questioned the slaughter of unarmed crewmen, the firing upon medical frigates, the destruction of planetary vox grids that left millions of civilians blind to the warp. Huron's answer: "Mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford." Foros left without a word, but the silence was a fracture. Then came Gurion's fall, a minor mining world on the edge of the Maelstrom, home to a vital promethium refinery and a population of nearly 6 million. The Mantis warriors were tasked with securing it before the Howling Griffins could claim it. They succeeded. Too well. When the Griffin's fleet arrived, they found Gurion's sky alight, cities razed, habs melted into slag, civilians turned into clouds of ash. The Mantis warriors had deployed cyclonic torpedoes, ordnance used only in exterminatus operations. The planetary death toll was total. Loyalist Vox archives would later replay a single transmission sent from the lead strike cruiser. Huron commands: "Let nothing remain." The Imperium wept, and the warders watched in silence. The executioners were the next to falter. Though their blades remained red with loyalist blood, they began to question the why. Their chapter was bound by honor, duels, challenges, the test of metal. But this war had become something else. No duels, no glory, just slaughter. When they received a missive from the Fire Angels chapter, invoking an ancient pact of brotherhood dating back to the Horus heresy, the executioners hesitated. They did not respond immediately, but they read it, and they remembered. Soon after, when ordered by Huron to join a multi-chapter strike on the Prolixis Relay, a civilian-dense listening post used by Imperial navigators, they refused. Instead, they returned to their fleet. Their message to Huron was clear. "We joined to defend the Maelstrom, not to burn it." They were not yet traitors to him, but they were no longer tools, and Huron does not forgive indecision. Meanwhile, the Lamenters continued to bleed. Time and again, they threw themselves into the fire. They defended refugee flotillas under orbital bombardment. They shielded civilians during evacuations, even as Astral Claws executed planetary governors in public. They were the conscience of the rebellion, and for that, they were damned. The Minotaurs, one of the most merciless chapters deployed by the Imperium, targeted the Lamenters with single-minded fury. Entire battalions were annihilated during the siege of Optera's shield. At the Battle of Bellerophon's wake, the Lamenters held their ground for 9 days under constant orbital assault, only to be outflanked and butchered. Their losses mounted, their brothers perished, their hope fractured. And still Huron asked more. He demanded they redeploy to Avernus Reach, another suicide defense. Phoros refused. Instead, he contacted the Red Scorpions, secretly. His message: "We are not your enemy. End this war, spare our few." The Red Scorpions, ever precise, offered terms: surrender, disarmament, atonement crusade. The Lamenters accepted. And just like that, one pillar of Huron's alliance was gone. When Huron learned of the betrayal, he did not rage, he did not scream. He simply stared at the Vox relay, whispered something to the Hamadria, and ordered 30 captives executed in the palace square. Some were Lamenters who had remained behind, some were not. The message was clear: leave me, and you are nothing. The Mantis warriors, ever silent, watched this unfold. They had no love for the Lamenters, no respect for the Executioner's code. But they understood power, and they began to ask themselves, how long before we are next? Then came the turning point. In 907 M41, the Red Scorpions and Carcharodons launched simultaneous strikes across 3 sectors. The Carcharodons, ghosts in gray, descended upon Mantis warrior positions like avenging revenants. They gave no warnings, spoke no terms, and they butchered. The Mantis warriors had trained for stealth, but the Carcharodons were predators. Within weeks, the Mantis warriors' strength was broken. With no escape, no reinforcements, and no trust left in Huron's leadership, they did what the Lamenters had done before. They sued for mercy. The Imperium, ever pragmatic, accepted. Another ally gone. The Executioners. They never turned fully, but they disappeared. They left the war entirely, retreating into the depths of space to await judgment from their own traditions. They sent no apology, no declaration, only silence. Huron understood. Silence was worse than betrayal. Silence was abandonment. Now Huron stood alone. Where once he commanded a coalition, now he held only the Astral Claws, a handful of Black Shield warbands, and what remained of his private fleets. He had built a rebellion on the backs of belief, and now, one by one, those backs had broken. But he did not yield. He gathered what forces remained. He carved a sigil into the throne room's obsidian floor, a new claw, red and jagged. They were weak, he told his captains. Let them go. We remain. And that is enough. He raised his axe. The Imperium thinks the war is won. Let them come. Let them think the beast is cornered. He turned toward the great star map of Badab, its points now flickering with enemy strength. They will learn. I am not a cornered beast. I am the claw in the dark. And so the stage was set for the final act. The war had become a siege, and the tyrant had no more friends, only teeth. There are wars that end in triumph. There are wars that end in retreat. And then there are wars that end in silence, the heavy, oppressive kind that hangs in the air like smoke long after the fire has died. The kind of silence that comes after a god has fallen. This is the story of the fall of Badab Primaris, the fall of a chapter, the fall of a dream, the fall of the man once called Lufgt Huron. By the time the loyalist war machine turned its full gaze toward Badab Primaris, the battlefields beyond had been reduced to ruin. The outer systems were ash. The Maelstrom warders were gone, broken, scattered, or surrendered. The warp routes to Badab had been cleared with blood and promethium, and there, at the center of it all, stood the final prize, the Palace of Thorns, a fortress not just of stone and steel, but of pride, of history, of defiance incarnate. The Imperium had razed fortresses before. It had laid waste to star systems and choked the void with wreckage. But the Palace of Thorns would not fall so easily. Because it was not a target, it was a challenge. High above the capital spires of Badab Primaris, a vast defensive web hummed to life. Gun batteries, shield projectors, and orbital flak cannons formed an iron curtain around the planet. The Star Phantoms, chosen by the Lords militant to lead the final assault, advanced under heavy escort. They came not in haste, but with calculation. By this point, the war had dragged on for nearly a decade. It had become personal. The Astral Claws had inflicted wound after wound on the Imperium, not merely in blood, but in pride. Chapter masters slain, fleets humiliated, battle honors tainted by association with secessionist kin. The time had come to erase Huron from history, to carve his name from the rolls, burn it, scatter the ashes. The siege would begin with fire. The first strikes came from orbit. The Loyalist fleet unleashed a bombardment so vast it cracked the skies. Cyclonic torpedoes detonated in low orbit, atomizing defense platforms and igniting atmospheric fires that danced across the stratosphere like aurorae of wrath. Lance batteries speared into the city's outer defenses, hammering down layer after layer of void shields. And inside the Palace of Thorns, Huron watched. He stood in the Hall of Echoes, a vaulted chamber where once diplomatic envoys from across the sector had once paid homage. Now it served as a war room. He was silent. His captains, few now, battered and half-armored, stood around the tactical hololith, watching the readouts light up red. Above them, the ceiling trembled. The sky was falling in flame. One of them, Varnak, last commander of the 8th Company, finally spoke. "The shields won't hold." Huron turned to him, his voice ragged from years of battle and augmentation. "Then we'll stand where they fall." The Loyalists landed 3 days later. The first wave was all business. Star Phantoms, Fire Angels, and Red Scorpions deployed in precision drop pods and Thunderhawks, each descending into the heart of a war zone that had been prepared for decades. And the Astral Claws were ready. They fought not as desperate rebels, but as brothers defending their last home. Every corridor of the palace was a kill zone, every hall rigged with traps, every spire a sniper's perch. Mines were buried beneath marble flagstones. Ambushes were laid beneath statues of saints. The Loyalists took ground, but they paid for every inch with blood. The siege of the Palace of Thorns was not a storming. It was a butchery. At the gates of the Chamber of Remembrance, where the gene seed vaults were hidden, a full squad of Fire Angels was melted to bone and slag by captured Volkite weaponry, ancient tech pulled from forbidden vaults beneath the palace. The gene seed was nowhere to be found. It had been moved, burned, or worse. Elsewhere, Red Scorpions breached the Spiral Cloister, a cathedral-like tower that spiraled 5 kilometers into the sky. They expected resistance. They found massacred civilians chained to explosives. When the Red Scorpions tried to disarm them, Astral Claws sprung the ambush. That tower still burns, its spirals broken like a shattered crown. Everywhere, the Loyalists began to realize this was no longer a battle to win. It was a battle to end. And Huron, he had made peace with the end. Deep within the inner sanctum of the palace, beneath vaults reinforced with adamantium and rituals long forgotten, Huron gathered his final war council. There were no grand speeches, no last rites. He simply stood before them, armored in his modified cataphracti plate, its surfaces scarred, blackened, dented. His right arm, entirely replaced by a massive servo claw, still smoked from its most recent kill. The Hamadria crouched at his side, its eyes glowing, its voice a hiss in a language only Huron could understand. He looked at each of them, his captains, his champions, his last brothers. and he said, "We were not made for surrender." Then he walked to the reliquary at the heart of the chamber. There, resting on a plinth, was a shard of silvered metal, the remains of the first Astral Claws standard. He took it in his hand, crushed it, and turned to the door. The final assault came 6 days later. The Star Phantoms breached the central courtyard with land raiders and dreadnoughts leading the charge. Carcharodons followed, silent and blood-soaked, tearing through defenders with chain blades that howled like mourning wolves. And there, in the great throne room at the palace's heart, the tyrant awaited them. He did not hide. He did not flee. He stood atop the final dais, surrounded by the burning banners of his chapter, the corpses of his last guard piled around him. And as the loyalists entered, he spoke a final challenge. "I am Huron of Badab. Come, bleed for your masters." The fighting was apocalyptic. Huron cleaved through 2 red scorpions before they even reached the stairs. He smashed a dreadnought's sarcophagus with a melta blast from his claw. He fought like a god made of rage and steel, but the loyalists were legion, and in the end it was Rogal Androcles, chapter master of the Star Phantoms, who struck the blow. Wounded, his power armor cracked and seeping, Androcles drove his melta-gun into Huron's chest and fired. The blast tore through plate and bone. Huron fell, but he did not die. The Astral Claws had not made plans for victory. They had made plans for escape. Even as the Loyalists pressed in, a secondary force of Astral Claws executed Exodus Protocol, a last-ditch operation meant to extract their wounded master at any cost. They stormed through Loyalist lines, dragging Huron's smoldering body back through maintenance tunnels and hidden warp gates. Loyalists gave chase, but the trail went cold in the heart of the burning city. By the time orbital scans recalibrated, a single fleet, black-hulled, signal-scrambled, was gone. Vanished into the Maelstrom, and with it, the Tyrant. In the days that followed, Badab Primaris burned. The Palace of Thorns was leveled, its stones shattered, its foundations reduced to rubble. The Astral Claws were declared extinct, their gene seed declared corrupted, their names stricken from the records. Only whispers remained, and the Imperium celebrated. But in the darkest corners of the Maelstrom, a voice still breathed. It did not scream, it did not rage, it whispered, and it said, "I am not finished." Thus ended the siege of the Palace of Thorns. But not the story. The war was over, but Huron Blackheart had just begun. In the legends of old Terra, there are tales of dragons who fall, wounded by the blades of kings, pierced by arrows of destiny, and vanish into the mountains to die. But not all dragons perish in silence. Some crawl into the darkness, broken, bleeding, and change. They grow new scales, hardened, darker, deadlier. They return not as beasts, but as monsters. This is what became of Lake Huron. He did not die on Badab Primaris. He did not surrender. He did not beg for mercy beneath the blades of his executioners. He vanished, spirited away by the last loyal sons of the Astral Claws as fire consumed his throne and banners were torn from their moorings. He escaped, but not whole. His wounds were cataclysmic. The melta blast that felled him had torn through his chest, vaporized sections of his torso, and seared half his face into charred ruin. His left lung was gone. 2 of his 3 hearts had stopped beating. His spine had been fractured in 3 places. His primary and secondary livers, designed to filter poisons and battle stimulants, had burst under thermal stress. His right arm, already a mechanical monstrosity, was mangled and fused. And yet, he lived. Barely. His escape vessel, the Spectre of Wrath, fled deep into the Maelstrom, hounded by vengeful loyalist forces. It limped from system to system, slipping into the warp's edge, vanishing through gravity rifts and corrupted slipways that only the damned could navigate. Within the ship's stinking Medicae decks, apothecaries worked with desperate skill, mixing Imperial surgery with forbidden technologies. Augmentations were forced into his body not as enhancements, but necessities. Cybernetic organ replacements, bionic fluid systems, warp-insulated nerve sheaths. They carved away the man, and in his place they built something new. For months he was unconscious, a shell of scorched ceramite and dying flesh. The Hamadria, ever at his side, would not leave the stasis chamber. It coiled around his body like a serpent, purring with static noise, whispering in bursts of corrupted binaric and ancient tongues. Some said it kept his soul anchored. Others believed it rewrote it. When Huron finally awoke, he did not speak for 3 days. He simply sat in silence, surrounded by the red-lit chamber, his claw resting on the steel floor, watching the flicker of the warp outside the view slit. Stars warped and spun into impossible spirals as his ship drifted without direction. His first words were not of vengeance. They were not of mourning. They were, "Show me the map." And from that moment, the tyrant was reborn. But he was not Lufgt Huron anymore. That name had burned on Badab. He had walked into the fire as a chapter master. He had emerged as something else. From the Maelstrom, he would take a new name, Huron Blackheart, Tyrant of the Red Corsairs. The Red Corsairs were not born in a day. They were not a legion, not a splinter, not even a war band. Not yet. They began as survivors, the last remnants of the Astral Claws, damaged ships, wounded warriors, traitor-flagged vessels too notorious to dock in real space, too feared to be welcomed even by other renegades. They drifted in exile, their names cursed across 100 systems. But where others saw ruin, Huron saw opportunity. Within the Maelstrom, law meant nothing. Power ruled. The Imperium had abandoned this region long ago, too unstable, too close to the warp, too costly to pacify. It had become a haven for every kind of scum. Void pirates, demon cultists, xeno-slavers, mad tech adepts, even fallen Astartes from other forgotten rebellions. Huron reached out to all of them, not with words, with strength. He began with raids, quick, vicious strikes against Imperial convoys, not for vengeance, but for resources. His crippled fleet was rebuilt with stolen Mechanicus tech. He enslaved navigators, press-ganged void crews, and forged alliances through terror. Then came the recruitment. He broadcast messages into the void, calls to every bitter, forsaken warrior who had ever been cast out by the Imperium. You are not broken. You are not alone. Join me and never kneel again. And they came. Warp-racked traitors from shattered chapters, disgraced Astartes branded renegade for crimes they never committed, black shields with no name and no cause, rogue tech marines, even elements of chaos-warped cults looking for a warlord who could offer more than mad promises. And Huron took them in. He forged them together not with loyalty, but with fear, purpose, and the dream of freedom through domination. The Red Corsairs were born, not as a traditional warband, but as a confederation of nightmares, a black fleet that roamed the void, feeding on Imperium and heretic alike, bound only by the will of their tyrant. And Huron changed. He was no longer the tactician who had once cited logistics and doctrine, no longer the bitter but pragmatic warlord of Badab. His injuries had become part of him, a mechanical shrike of flesh and steel, warped and inhuman. He adorned his new armor with crimson and brass, black and silver, and blood-etched glyphs. His claw, once a symbol of command, had become a weapon of pure destruction, able to shear dreadnoughts in half. And at his side, the Hamadria, now far more than a pet. Warp-slick and psionically attuned, it served as both familiar and prophet, whispering strange truths in tongues only the damned could understand. Some say it was a demon. Others say it was a shard of his soul. Huron never said. From his base of operations on the world of New Badab, a fortress planet deep within the Maelstrom, carved from the bones of a long-dead Xenos hive, Huron built his new empire. This time there were no governors, no tithes, no diplomacy, only war. The Red Corsairs began striking Imperial holdings across the Segmentum Obscurus, fueling rebellions, arming pirates, infecting shipping lanes with warp-tainted plagues. No longer merely a fugitive, Huron became a symbol of rebellion, of terror, of freedom twisted into nightmare. He no longer fought to survive. He fought to punish. The Imperium responded, of course. Naval task forces were dispatched. Inquisitors hunted his agents. Loyalist chapters were sent to cleanse the region. But the Maelstrom had changed. It had teeth now. Ships vanished without a trace. Vox signals distorted by techno-heresy. Whole fleets drawn into mirrored versions of real space, never to return. Planets turned upon themselves after Huron's agents seeded dissent and warp rituals. And in the dark, Huron laughed. He had become what the Imperium feared most, a traitor who did not serve chaos, a warlord with no master, an idea that could not be burned away. The final records of this rebirth are etched not in parchment, but in plasma scoring and the debris fields of shattered worlds. The tyrant who once claimed a sector now threatened entire subsectors, turning the Maelstrom into a bleeding wound that would never fully heal. And so the Imperium wrote his name once more, not as Lufgt Huron, but as Huron Blackheart, the black-hearted tyrant, the warp lord of the Maelstrom, warlord of the Red Corsairs, and his legend was only just beginning. For what is dead may rise again, and what rises from the warp does not die easily. The dragon did not fall. He simply learned to fly in fire. Empires can be shattered, but ambition is harder to kill. What the Imperium failed to understand, what it always fails to understand, is that men like Huron Blackheart do not seek thrones for glory. They do not crave adulation or songs in their name. Number men like Huron build empires because they believe no one else deserves to, because in the ashes of defeat, they still see a future they would rule. The tyrant had lost Badab. He had lost his chapter, his allies, half his body, and the last thread of his humanity. But in the heart of the Maelstrom, he found something greater. New Badab. It rose not from soil, but from conquest, from blood, from the twisted wreckage of a fallen Xenos world, long since consumed by the warp and reshaped by his will. This was not a world blessed by the Emperor's light. It was a world forged in defiance. New Badab was never just a planet. It was a monument, a fortress world carved into the bleeding edge of real space, surrounded by warp storms like a crown of fire. No maps led to it. No charts named it. Only the lost and the damned could find their way there, drawn by signal beacons that echoed not in Vox, but in dreams and whispers across the void. The surface was jagged, volcanic, and wholly unnatural. Black metal citadels rose like fangs from scorched plains, immense orbital dry docks, hacked together from looted Mechanicus relics and the stripped carcasses of once proud Imperial ships, hovered in synchronized orbit. The atmosphere was perpetually storm-racked. Lightning danced through skies the color of old blood. Yet, within the chaos, there was order, Huron's order. From this new throne, Huron ruled the Red Corsairs, but even that title was no longer sufficient. He had become something more. Warlord of the Maelstrom, not just a pirate lord, not merely a renegade. He was the gravitational core around which hundreds of warbands now spun. each one a star gone dark, a memory of past heresies reawakened. The warbands came in waves. Some were drawn by promises of plunder, others by revenge. Some came because there was nowhere else left to go. Cast out chapters, heretic cabals, corsair clans, cults, demon kin, all swore to him or died, and the ones who did swear, they were granted safe harbor within the Iron Ring, a planetary defense grid of such scale and lethality that even the Ordo Malleus hesitated to breach it. Fortress spires, orbital defense cannons, macro-void shields layered like the shells of some obscene crustacean. Imperial tacticians estimated it would take 3 segmentum battle fleets to lay siege to New Badab and prevail. None dared try. Not yet. In the shadow of this security, Huron thrived. He established a dark court, the Crimson Synod, composed of the most powerful and influential warlords in his dominion. Some were traitor Astartes, others were mortal commanders, tech priests gone rogue, warp seers and Xenos mercenaries with no true name. They did not meet in chambers or halls, but aboard the Scourge of Eternity, Huron's flagship, rebuilt from the bones of a captured Gloriana-class vessel, pulsing with unholy energy and machine spirits long driven mad. The Synod did not argue. They obeyed. Because Huron did not ask for consensus, he issued decrees, and they were followed. But New Badab was more than a throne. It was an engine of war. The forges of the Mechanicum dissidents he had sheltered now churned out weapons forbidden even to the Dark Mechanicus. Bioforges created clones and servitors in bulk. Fabricator warpsmiths rebuilt power armor from scrapped relics, welding Imperial sigils upside down in mocking tribute. Shipyards churned out new raiders, fast, jagged things designed not for defense but predation. Each year, the Red Corsairs grew stronger, not in legions, but in webs, cells, fleets, cults of personality and terror, striking out across the Imperium, not to conquer, but to weaken. A starport lost here, a shrine desecrated there, an inquisitor ambushed, his records wiped from history, a gene seed convoy destroyed, its precious legacy scattered to the warp. This was not open war. This was insurgency on a galactic scale. And the Imperium bled from 1,000 cuts. And all of it was orchestrated from a throne not of gold, but of iron and blackstone. At the heart of New Badab, within the throne crypt, Huron sat. His body was a ruin. Cybernetic augments now replaced most of his organs. Pneumatics hissed when he moved. His once noble face was hidden beneath a grotesque helm, with one burning red eye and the other veiled in shadows. He did not speak often, but when he did, his words rippled across the galaxy. "The Imperium is a dying hulk," he once declared to his assembled corsairs, blind, deaf, and dumb to the cries of its people. "It rules not with wisdom, but with inertia. It survives out of habit. I am not a heretic. I am not a slave of the gods. I am the answer to the question the Imperium fears to ask. What happens when a son refuses to kneel?" His warriors roared. They did not follow him for belief. They followed him because he gave them purpose. Because in a galaxy where loyalty was a death sentence and righteousness a trap, Huron offered power. Yet, even now, there are whispers that the tyrant has changed, that the Hamadria, his ever-present companion, speaks more than he does now, that the warp has begun to seep deeper into the bones of New Badab, that strange structures are rising in the depths, ziggurats of obsidian etched with runes not written by human hands, that the voice Huron hears in the dark is no longer his own. Some say he has made pacts, others say he was always fated to fall, but all agree he is no longer a man. He is a force, a wound in the galaxy that refuses to close, and still his reach grows. Through hidden wormholes and warp tunnels, Red Corsair agents infiltrate new sectors. In the Calixis sector, a string of raids leaves administratum nodes crippled for weeks. In the Ghoul Stars, Corsair ships trade prisoners for demon tech. In the Jericho Reach, a watch station of the Death Watch is found abandoned, its servitors crucified, its vaults empty. No longer just raiders, saboteurs, strategists, symbols. To the Imperium, Huron is a curse, an echo of what happens when pride goes unpunished. To his followers, he is a messiah of vengeance. To others still, rogue traders, dissident nobles, and those born into the shadows of dying worlds, he is hope, a terrible hope, but hope nonetheless. And so, from the Iron Throne of New Badab, the tyrant watches the stars, not as prey, but as potential. He does not seek to conquer Terra. Not yet. He seeks to unravel the Imperium one thread at a time, until when it finally collapses under its own weight, there will be no one left but him to pick up the pieces. And when that day comes, he will not wear the Aquila, he will not praise the Emperor, he will raise a claw, and the galaxy will bow. Thus reigns Huron Blackheart, tyrant, warlord, godless king of the void, lord of New Badab. They say the Imperium forgets its enemies too quickly. When a rebellion is crushed, its banners are burned, its names erased, its monuments razed until nothing remains but silence. And in that silence, the Adeptus Terra turns its gaze elsewhere, toward fresh threats, new wars, greater sacrifices. It believes that once something is buried, it stays buried. But Huron Blackheart was never a name you could bury, because you cannot bury what knows how to crawl in the dark. The Red Corsairs do not wage war like others. They do not march in formation or hold planets for glory. They do not seek banners raised over conquered worlds or sing praises to the ruinous powers in the spires of shrines. That is the work of zealots or madmen. Huron is neither. He is a strategist, a predator, and the void is his hunting ground. From the shadow of the Maelstrom, his fleets pour forth, fangs that strike not in grand battles, but in coordinated ruin. Planets are not besieged. They are bled dry. Their convoys vanish. Their agri-worlds are poisoned. Their astropaths disappear. By the time anyone realizes what's happened, the world is already starving. It is not conquest. It is suffocation. On the world of Kammerstadt Prime, the first signs came with broken Vox relays. Planetary governors assumed it was a solar storm. Then came the power failures. Orbital relays sabotaged, defense systems glitching. The PDF was mobilized, patrols increased, but there were no signs of enemy landing. Until the sky turned red. A single Red Corsair vessel, the Bladed Promise, appeared in high orbit. It did not fire. It did not transmit. It simply opened its hangar bays, and out came a tide of drop pods and grav barges, deploying raiders directly into the upper hive levels. The Corsairs moved like ghosts. They didn't hold ground. They stole data, seized vaults, abducted Mechanicus personnel, and left the hab blocks in flames. By the time the planetary defense commanders could mount a response, the Corsairs were already gone. Kammerstadt survived, but it never recovered. Its economy collapsed, its tech priests vanished, its tithes failed, and the Imperium marked it as strategically unviable. That is how Huron wages his war, not through domination, but through decay. Each strike calibrated, each victory invisible until the rot has already spread too far to cut away. And all across the Segmentum Obscurus, the pattern repeats. A listening post in the Corvus Reach is found vented, entire data cores missing, its cogitators still running diagnostic chants. A rogue trader fleet is ambushed in the Giles Rift, their navigators crucified, their ships repainted in red claw motifs before being turned against nearby Imperial depots. A Death Watch kill team investigating Black Shield sightings in the Shadowfolds sends a single message. They were never Black Shields. They belonged to him. Silence follows. To the High Lords of Terra, the Red Corsairs remain a threat. Yes, but one of many. They are not a crusade. They are not a Black Crusade. And so, they are not prioritized. But to those in the region, to Void Fleet commanders, rogue traders, planetary governors, Huron is something far worse. He is unpredictable, because no one knows where he will strike next. No pattern, no borders, just void. One year, he may cripple a Mechanicus Forge world for its plasma containment data. The next, he'll sack an ecclesiarchy shrine, not for relics, but for the psyker hidden in its dungeons. His attacks seem chaotic until you see the bigger picture. He is building something, but no one knows what. And yet, for all his mystery, Huron's reach is not infinite. He is a warlord without a true empire, a conqueror without a crown. And he knows this. That is why he hides in the dark. In 930 M41, an Imperial probe ship ventured too close to the Maelstrom. Its crew, veteran void navigators of the Navis Nobilite, were experienced, reinforced by multiple inquisitorial data runes, and guided by artificial gravity pulses to stabilize warp drift. They were never seen again. But the Vox record survived. 3 minutes of screaming, then static, then a voice, not mechanical, not demonic, calm, deep, measured. You came looking for a ghost. Instead, you found a god. The Vox loop ends with laughter. It plays now on repeat in the interrogation archives of the Ordo Xenos. No one has claimed responsibility, but those who know Huron's voice do not question it. He is still watching. He does not sit idly on New Badab. His spies infiltrate the Mechanicus and steal from their vaults. His sorcerers, yes, he has them now, whether or not he claims to be chaos-bound, read the stars not with prophecy but with data. They chart Imperial fleet movements, monitor astropathic pulses, and forecast vulnerabilities as a Magos might predict solar flares. And when weakness appears, he strikes. But it is not just logistics that Huron targets. It is hope. The shrine world of Ionix Quintus was a jewel in the Obscurus, a pilgrimage site rich in relics, host to the bones of 100 martyrs. It had no strategic value. So when Huron's fleet descended, the Imperium was caught off guard. He did not raid. He did not pillage. He broadcast. Every Vox in every hive, every cathedral bell, every pick-slate screen, replaced by a single message, looped endlessly in 10,000 voices, speaking in unison. Your saints cannot hear you. Your God does not care. Your Imperium is a myth, but I am real. Then the planet's gravity well was shattered with a relic gravity bomb. Ionix Quintus no longer exists. Even in the Eye of Terror, warlords whisper of Huron with a mix of awe and caution. Not because he serves the gods, but because he does not. In a realm ruled by mad champions of Khorne, Tzeentch, Slaanesh, and Nurgle, Huron is something else. Unshackled, unaffiliated, unforgiving. He has taken Chaos's tools, sorcery, corruption, mutation, and wielded them not as devotions but as weapons. He uses chaos. He does not kneel to it. And that, more than anything, terrifies the lords of the Imperium, because every other heretic can be traced back to a god. But Huron? He is his own cause. So what does he want? That is the question the Inquisition has failed to answer for a century. Does he seek vengeance? He's already had it. Power? He has that in spades. A new empire? Then why does he never hold territory? The answer, perhaps, lies not in his strategy, but in his nature. Huron Blackheart is a paradox, a man forged by structure and discipline, now thriving in chaos. A warlord who preaches independence yet commands a fleet of obedient killers. A rebel who hates the Imperium for its chains, even as he builds his own from blood and oath. He is not fighting for a better galaxy. He is fighting so that he alone can decide what it becomes. In the black between stars, there is a whisper. It echoes across Vox voids and forgotten warp routes. He is coming, not with fire, not with banners, but with silence. And then, one by one, systems go dark. Not conquered, not destroyed, just gone. And somewhere in the Maelstrom, aboard the Scourge of Eternity, a figure leans forward over a star map, red light glowing from beneath a half-ruined helm. At his side, a creature shifts, its voice rasping in clicks and hisses no machine can translate. Huron does not blink. He points to a star. Next, and the claw in the dark moves once more. A sword in motion is easy to see. A marching army can be tracked. A fleet launching from orbit can be charted. A world turned to glass by cyclonic warheads leaves a message clear and unmistakable. I was here. I have power. That is not how Huron Blackheart fights. He is not a hammer. He is not even the blade. He is the shadow behind the strike, the silence before the scream. Where others announce their presence with fanfare and fury, Huron enters unseen, speaks only in the language of ruin, and disappears before anyone fully understands what's been lost. His war is not one of conquest. It is corrosion, slow, intelligent, unrelenting. A cancer growing behind the curtain while the patient dances in the light. The Imperium, for all its might, is still blind to the shape of his war, because they do not see the world as he does. It begins with patience. Most warlords launch their campaigns with showmanship, planetary sieges, orbital blockades, the grand choreography of banners clashing. Huron learned long ago that this kind of war feeds the propaganda engines of the Imperium. If you play their game, you become part of their story, a villain to be slain, a lesson for future generations. But if you make them suffer quietly without clarity or closure, you become something worse. You become fear itself. And that is what Huron truly wages, a war of fear. He does not strike the fortress. He poisons the water running beneath it. A star system will begin to fray at the edges, a shipment of medical supplies lost here, a relay station silenced there, an astropathic choir found dead in their temple. Individually, the signs seem disconnected, easily blamed on warp interference, local unrest, or minor Xenos incursion. By the time patterns emerge, it's too late. Whole defense networks collapse under the weight of cumulative failures, minor accidents, and quiet deaths. Civilian populations riot over missing food shipments. Worlds once considered secure become breeding grounds for cult activity and rebel sentiment. And then, when the system is just unsteady enough, the corsairs come. Not in full force. Not always. Sometimes a single strike cruiser, sometimes a dozen raiders with unfamiliar transponder codes. They don't conquer, they harvest. They seize relics, kidnap administratum functionaries, plunder gene seed stores, upload virusware into planetary cogitators, and vanish. And when reinforcements arrive, they find confusion, conflicting reports, Vox transmissions in wrong dialects, enemies dressed in loyalist colors. By then, the damage is done, not to the buildings, to the trust, the bonds between garrison and governor, between fleet and forge, between servant and master. Huron knows. Once doubt takes root, loyalty begins to rot. What makes this more horrifying is that he has no need to hold territory. He does not plant flags or raise monuments. His fleets are fast, agile, often autonomous. Cells of corsairs operate in the dark like insurgents, scattered across dozens of systems, some not even knowing the names of their own commanders. There is no central dogma beyond his will, no creed beyond his survival. And yet, everything moves with purpose. The corsairs do not strike at random. They strike in patterns, some simple, some so elaborate that even inquisitorial logic engines have failed to anticipate them. A sequence of attacks will distract and destabilize one flank of a subsector, while a secondary, seemingly unrelated incident disables the orbital elevators of a manufactorum half a segmentum away. Days later, a Mechanicus void yard there explodes from within. The Imperium scrambles to connect the dots, but Huron already has the next line drawn. No target is too insignificant. This is another truth that unnerves even hardened veteran commanders. Most war doctrines teach efficiency. Allocate your strength where the value is greatest. Protect the Forge worlds. Secure the cardinal planets. Maintain the Primaris trade lanes. Huron ignores these assumptions. He'll divert entire fleets to raid a feral world where the population barely understands space travel, simply because a hidden vault of archaeotech rests beneath its surface. He'll burn a decades-old penal colony to the ground for reasons unknown, until, years later, the Inquisition learns that a secret testing lab for psychic suppression callers had once been buried there. Every strike, no matter how random it appears, is measured. And the Imperium knows this now. They know Huron is not simply attacking. He is preparing. What unnerves them most is that he is not driven by dogma. The arch-warriors of the Eye of Terror scream praises to dark gods, pledging every drop of blood to eternal damnation in exchange for demonic power. But Huron, he does not kneel. He uses the warp, yes. His ships often carry sorcerers now. His own command bridge is thick with arcane fumes, its walls etched in impossible runes, the Hamadria whispering dark thoughts beside his throne. But Huron is no slave to chaos. He remains aloof, unbound, a sovereign even in damnation. He fights for no pantheon, only for himself. That makes him more dangerous. Because he is not predictable, because he is not deluded, because he remembers. He remembers the bureaucrats who ignored his pleas during the Maelstrom crisis. He remembers the tithe masters who demanded blood for parchment. He remembers the war councils who dismissed his warnings as prideful boasts. And now he makes them pay, not with death, but with instability. Every strike he makes chips away at the illusion of imperial control. Every missing convoy, every silent system, every loyalist chapter forced to redeploy from the eastern fringe to the Maelstrom weakens the Imperium's grip elsewhere. Huron fights a war the High Lords cannot understand because they are trying to win a battle, and he is trying to unmake a galaxy. Across the void, worlds continue to fall, not in fire but in silence. And somewhere aboard the Scourge of Eternity, Huron watches the star maps blink. Each red rune is not a conquest, it is a wound, a pressure point, a whisper of what is still to come. He leans forward, his breath rasps through bionic lungs. The Hamadria coils tighter, its tongue flicking across arcane console ports. A new star blinks into red. He does not smile, he does not gloat. He merely speaks. Now, and another world begins to unravel. Not from orbit, not with glory, but from inside. A name can be erased from a record, but not from memory. The Imperium is masterful at forgetting. It scours archives, purges monuments, reissues maps with redacted zones and renamed systems. Chapters that fall from grace are not simply condemned, they are unmade, as if they never existed. And so the Astral Claws are gone, their names struck from the rolls, their heraldry purged, their victories reassigned or silenced. But war remembers what history hides, and so do the dead. The Astral Claws were more than a chapter, they were a vision. a defiance of restriction, of stagnation. Under Lufgt Huron's command, they abandoned the chains of the Codex Astartes and sought something greater, an ideal of strength and independence. They didn't fall to heresy in a single moment. They changed by degrees. But when they fell hard. The survivors, those who escaped the siege of Badab Primaris, were scattered, their chapter shattered, their homeworld burned, their legacy painted as treachery incarnate. The Imperium hunted them like beasts, sending kill teams to the edge of the Maelstrom, rooting them out of asteroid bases, space hulks, and derelict fortresses. Some were caught, most were not. They vanished into the dark, and when the red corsairs rose, many returned, not as Astral Claws but as shadows. To understand what the Astral Claws became, one must understand what they lost. They were once paragons of martial perfection, tacticians, strategists, elite operators. Their brotherhood was forged through relentless war on the Imperium's outer edge, fighting enemies most chapters only studied in briefing halls. They weren't created to rebel, they were created to endure. And yet, in the end, they broke, not because they were weak, but because they were too strong to bend. When the Imperium demanded submission, they refused. When it sent enforcers, they resisted. And when it demanded their blood, they gave war. That kind of pride doesn't die easily. It festers. In the aftermath of the Badab War, those Astral Claws who had followed Huron into exile changed, some slowly, some violently. The Imperium's declaration of their damnation was a severance, an amputation from the only truth they had ever known. Their identity collapsed, and in that void Huron offered them a new one, not as warriors of the Emperor, but as his. The transformation was not uniform. The Red Corsairs are not a unified chapter, nor are they bound by the rituals and structure of the Codex. They are a swarm, a collection of warbands, cells, and rogue squads, each operating with different codes, livery, and discipline. But those former Astral Claws who remained closest to Huron, those who were with him on New Badab when he rose again, retained something unique. They retained memory. They still spoke to each other in Astral Claw battle cant. They still invoked the names of long-dead captains in whispered war prayers. They still bore their old chapter symbols, scarred, burned, or painted over, but never fully erased. And in battle, when the fighting was at its most brutal, they still moved like a company, still fought as one. The Imperium calls them traitors. But in truth, they are ghosts. And ghosts do not forget who they were. There are whispered accounts of Red Corsair strike teams whose formations mirror exact Codex Company tactics, sweeping arks, pinwheel flanks, collapse and bleed strategies that haven't been used since the old Terran Crusades. When Imperial tacticians examine the aftermath, they often misattribute it to Alpha Legion interference or word-bearer sub-factions. But those who have survived these encounters, veteran sergeants, inquisitorial bodyguards, sororitas paladins, describe something different. Not chaos, not religious zeal, but precision, tactical brilliance, death without rage, as if the enemy bore no hatred, only duty, as if they were still soldiers, still, somehow, loyal. Among these remnants, stories circulate of ancient dreadnoughts sealed within New Badab, still bearing the colors of the Astral Claws, their minds too damaged to be told they are traitors. They sleep in cold vaults, dreaming of a war long ended. When the call comes, they awaken, speak litanies to the Emperor, and march to battle under Huron's command. No one corrects them. No one dares. Worse still are the lost companies, entire elements of the Astral Claws that vanished into the Maelstrom during the war's final stages. Rumors persist of splinter fleets drifting in the warp, crewed by Gene brothers too mad to know which war they're still fighting. Sometimes, decades after a system has gone dark, a red corsair vessel appears bearing strange markings, symbols not found in any known record. A distorted claw, a reversed imperial eagle, names that have long since been erased. When interrogated, survivors of such raids speak of Astartes with no insignia, no words, only silence. Their movements are practiced, their formations perfect, but their eyes, what can be seen of them, are hollow, dead, as if they're fighting a war they lost lifetimes ago. Huron does not speak of them, not publicly. But there is a chamber deep within the iron bastion of New Badab, beneath the war forges and data crypts, where he walks alone. Its walls are carved with the names of the Astral Claws fallen, his fallen. No chaos runes, no blasphemies, just names. Captain Vendral, Librarian Kyle, Sergeant Brannick of the 3rd, Apothecary Sen Valiar. Each name a thread pulled from a tapestry no longer woven. It is said that when he enters this chamber, he removes his helmet. It is said that he stands in silence and listens, not for voices, but for ghosts. The loyalty of these revenants is not rooted in madness, it is rooted in betrayal. They do not serve the gods. They do not kill for pleasure. They fight because they were cast out, because the Imperium judged them guilty and never offered a chance to speak. They were written off, and so they rewrote themselves. And Huron? Huron is the anchor that holds their broken truth together. He does not lead as a messiah. He leads as a reminder. To the Imperium, this is the deepest heresy, not the worship of dark gods, not the defilement of sacred worlds, but the idea that men could abandon the Emperor and still believe they are right. The Astral Claws do not crave forgiveness. They do not seek redemption. They only want to finish the war they never stopped fighting. That is why they endure, because even in damnation they remember who they were. They remember the oaths, the drills, the campaigns, the brothers who fell not to heresy, but to the Imperium's own short-sightedness. They are the claws beneath the skin, the memory the Imperium tried to erase, the truth it failed to bury. And so when the red corsairs descend upon a world, and among them walk warriors too coordinated, too silent, too disciplined to be mere raiders, listen closely. When they speak in clipped phrases that feel too familiar, when their bolt rounds strike with surgical perfection, when they pause just briefly at the sight of a golden aquila before continuing their kill path, know this: the Astral Claws are not dead. They are only wearing new armor, and they have not forgotten. The Eye of Terror watches everything, not with eyes, but with intention. It peers through time and thought, through the cracks in mortal minds, through the screams of the damned echoing across the warp like prayer song. Most who drift too close are either consumed or changed. But Huron Blackheart is neither. He is not consumed. He is not changed. He is something else entirely. He is a man who gazes back. By all rights, the Tyrant of Badab should have fallen fully into the embrace of chaos. He has the scars, the hate, the legacy of betrayal. He has spilled blood in his own name, defied the Emperor, reshaped truth to fit his will. He has become a pirate king of the warp-touched void, and yet he does not kneel at any altar. He does not offer fealty to the ruinous pantheon. The gods have noticed, and they are not pleased. In the depths of the Maelstrom, chaos is not a philosophy. It is a presence. The gods are not distant. They are hungry. They whisper through the flicker of warp storms and the maddening murmur of corrupted machine spirits. Demons walk the void. Rituals summon answers from the howling dark. To most renegade warlords, these gods are salvation, power incarnate, bargains waiting to be made. But when they reached for Huron, they found a closed fist, not an open palm. He took what he needed: sorcery, demon-forged weapons, forbidden knowledge, but never offered his soul in return. He bent the warp to his will like a forge master commanding molten iron, and it burned him for it. But it did not break him. Those closest to him have witnessed the signs. The Hamadria, his ever-present companion, pulses with something not quite alive and not quite demonic. It speaks in riddles no warp seer can translate, shifts shape when no one is watching, and sometimes whispers things to Huron that leave even veteran Red Corsair captains silent. They say it is a demon. They say it is a warp familiar. They say it is the part of Huron that died and clawed its way back through the veil. But no one really knows. Even the Tyrant doesn't seem to fully understand what it is. Or perhaps worse, he understands it too well. On the void moon of Kralak's Deep, cultists of the Dark Mechanicum once summoned a host of Tzeentchian demons in exchange for power. The ritual backfired when the Red Corsairs arrived, not because Huron opposed it, but because he outbid them. Instead of joining the ritual, he walked through the circle with his claw axe raised, bisected the high priest in a single blow, and seized the warp-forged core at the center of the rite. The demons screamed. The warp recoiled, but it did not consume him. Somehow the barrier held. Huron stood within a storm of unreality and bent it to his will. The surviving cultists begged to join him. He burned them alive. His message was simple: I am no one's servant. This refusal of servitude doesn't make him virtuous, it makes him dangerous. To chaos, to the Imperium, to everyone. Because Huron doesn't just defy the Emperor, he defies everything: order, faith, fate, destiny. He does not accept the world as it is. He takes it, claws it, reshapes it. He fights not for vengeance anymore. He fights because only he should rule. And yet, the gods are patient. They don't always demand loyalty. Sometimes they simply wait. Sometimes they make you need them. There was a moment. It is not spoken of in Red Corsair archives, but it is whispered through the soul echoes of psychers who dream of Maelstrom fire. A moment during the retreat from the Cyclades Gate, when Huron's flagship was pinned between two inquisitorial kill fleets and an orbital net of psychic interference. Every escape route was closed. Teleportarium tech was crippled. Astropathic jammers howled with blasphemous static, and the stars themselves seemed to tilt against him. For 13 hours he said nothing. Then he ordered the bridge cleared. Only the Hamadria remained, and the lights dimmed. What happened in that sealed chamber is unknown. But when Huron emerged, he was different. His voice echoed with something deeper. His armor's joints hissed with runes that weren't there before. His claw no longer sparked, it screamed. He gave the order. And against all logic, all physics, the scourge of eternity vanished from the trap. Not through warp jump, not through conventional means. It simply disappeared, folded sideways through a crack in reality that should not have been there. Moments later, a storm erupted at the site, a warp rift so violent it scoured 3 systems of all life. The Inquisition called it a minor demon incursion, but the survivors of the Corsairs, those few on the edges of the fleet who witnessed the moment, knew otherwise. They called it a bargain sealed. Huron has never spoken of it, but since that day he has worn a chain around his neck, bearing no sigil, and the Hamadria watches more closely than ever. So now the gods do not ask for his soul. They do not whisper seductions or bargains. They watch, they circle, and they wait for him to falter, because pride is a form of worship, and Huron's pride is monumental. His certainty of self is a shrine, and every kill, every victory, every cruel refusal to die feeds the warp. Across the fractured skies of 1,000 war-torn sectors, when void stations fall silent and defense fleets vanish without a trace, one name rises like a bitter echo, spoken in dread, written in blood, whispered in the dying breath of astropaths caught in their last vision of crimson sails. The red corsairs are here. No longer are they seen as mere pirates, raiders, or scavengers of chaos's leftovers. That time is gone. The age of ambiguity has passed. The galaxy now knows what they are, a storm, crafted by the tyrant's will, fanned by vengeance, and sharpened by desperation. It did not happen all at once. Power seldom does. The rise of the Red Corsairs was not some explosive crusade or mass conversion, like the Black Crusades of Abaddon or the genocidal blood tides of Angron. Huron's way was slower, more calculated, a creeping corrosion through the lattice of imperial order. One ship, one world, one soul at a time. But as the years bled into decades, his reach multiplied. He stopped being a threat. He became a presence. Wherever the Imperium is weak, wherever its shield falters for even a moment, there he is, a shadow in the warp, a predator in the deep. No longer confined to the Maelstrom, the Red Corsairs have spread outward like cracks in the hull of the Imperium itself. Huron's forces now plague vast corridors of the Segmentum Obscurus, reach into the Ultima Segmentum, and even whisper into the edges of the Segmentum Pacificus. The Maelstrom is no longer just a wound, it is a kingdom, and its king wears a black crown. From New Badab, the tyrant sends out his blades, warbands given broad directives, outfitted with plundered relics, demon-warped weapons, and intelligence gathered from agents embedded deep within the Imperium. No raid is aimless, no attack random. An ecclesiarchal shrine on a dead pilgrimage route suddenly vanishes. A Space Marine chapter's hidden gene seed vault is discovered and emptied without a trace. An inquisitorial black ship, thought protected by the most advanced astropathic cloaking protocols, goes dark and is found weeks later with its Geller field core surgically removed. This is not opportunism, this is strategy. Huron's brilliance lies not in brute force, but in delegation. He has birthed a hierarchy of terror. He does not demand worship. He does not demand fanaticism. What he offers is purpose to those abandoned by the Imperium, those cast out, those betrayed. A place, a voice, a fleet. He has become a beacon to renegades. And from the mire of desperation, these lost warriors rise. Some were once noble sons of Guillemon, Dorn, Vulcan. Now they fly the black and crimson, stripped of honor, driven by rage, bound not by chapter but by opportunity. And beneath Huron's rule, these warbands don't devolve into infighting. Because Huron watches, because Huron punishes, because those who defy the chain of command are turned into living examples of loyalty gone wrong. One such tale spreads through the ranks like a campfire legend. A warband known as the Graven Teeth, former Howling Griffins turned Corsair, refused to answer a summons from New Badab. They believed themselves strong enough to operate alone, feared enough to defy orders. When they next emerged from the warp, their ships were adrift. Boarding parties found the crews still alive, but maimed. Every captain had been nailed to their command thrones with their tongues removed. The Vox systems had been overwritten to repeat a single phrase in binary. Disobedience feeds the silence. No one questioned Huron again that year. It's this balance of freedom and fear that keeps the Red Corsairs functioning where so many other renegade forces collapse into madness or demon worship. Each warband is allowed to maintain its identity, its tactics, heraldry, traditions, so long as it serves the tyrant's broader goals. There are void pirates who fly shattered banners of lost chapters, tech marines who craft forbidden machines using STCs recovered from Mechanicus tombs, even sorcerer cults who whisper Tzeentch's name behind closed doors, but bow to Huron's authority in the light. He does not care what they believe, only what they do. And what they do is spread unrest. Planets that once saw the red corsairs as little more than raiders now fortify their atmospheres as if expecting a crusade. Hive cities practice evacuation drills. Sector governors triple their tithe offerings in exchange for additional defense fleets. Fear has become its own contagion. But even fear is not fast enough, because by the time the Imperium reacts, Huron has already moved. The siege of Varka's Gulf was not a siege in the traditional sense. It began with a freighter disappearing from the warp, then another. Then 2 orbital stations failed to check in. The Mechanicus blamed solar activity. Administratum scribes adjusted trade flows, and then came the blackout. Every communication relay across the subsector went dead. Silence. Not static. True silence. When the first response fleet arrived, they found the world of Varka Prime burning. Its orbital grid was shattered, its PDF annihilated, its manufactorum infrastructure gone. But no bodies, not a single corpse, only messages carved into the steel walls of command bunkers in jagged high Gothic. This is what obedience buys you. It wasn't war, it was theft of meaning. And so the Imperium is forced to adapt, not with strength, but with paranoia. The Inquisition begins hunting whisper networks in hive undercities, hoping to catch the scent of Red Corsair sympathizers. Space Marine chapters on the Maelstrom's edge shift from garrison duty to roving patrols. Rogue traders, once protected by ancient pacts, now travel only in convoys or risk becoming prizes in Huron's ever-hungry raiding games. But it is never enough, because Huron has long since ceased to be just a man. He is an idea that says the Imperium is fallible, that its warriors can turn, that its gods can be ignored, and that from the ashes of loyalty, power can rise. From the bridge of the scourge of eternity, he watches it all unfold, not with joy, not with rage, but with the cold calculation of a ruler who knows that his time is not only coming, it is already here. He does not need to win every war, he only needs the Imperium to bleed a little longer. Because empires do not collapse in a single battle. They collapse one fracture at a time. And the Red Corsairs are not here to burn the Imperium down all at once. They are here to cut out its heart in pieces. So when you next hear the scream of a failing Gelar field, when your Vox arrays echo with static that smells of blood and ozone, when the skies turn red above your hive city and the only message you receive is silence, know that the tyrant has spoken, and he does not ask, he takes. In the sprawling, broken empire of man, where the stars themselves weep under the weight of 10,000 years of war, there are names etched so deeply into the bones of the galaxy that they cannot be forgotten. They linger, not as wounds, but as scars, permanent, ugly, remembered not in reverence, but in caution, and among them one name is spoken with unease even in the fortified halls of High Lords and Inquisitorial archives. Huron Blackheart, the Tyrant of Badab, the Warlord of the Maelstrom, the Claw in the Void. But what, truly, is his legacy? To the Imperium it is heresy, rebellion, treason writ large in the blood of loyal Astartes and the ashes of scorched systems. Huron is catalogued in the Inquisitorial databanks as an excommunicate traitoress of the highest order. A cautionary tale taught to new commanders and inducted Space Marines alike. A reminder of what becomes of those who place pride above loyalty. His name is invoked alongside Horus, Cypher, and Abaddon, not because he rivaled them in scale, but because he endured. And that endurance is more terrifying than any daemon host or warp ritual. For Huron Blackheart did not fall to madness. He did not sacrifice his soul on an altar or pledge allegiance to screaming gods. He chose this path and never once looked back. But his legacy, like all things in the 41st millennium, is not so easily summarized. Because in the cracks between imperial records, there are those who speak of Huron not with hate, but with a grim, understanding respect. Rogue traders who remember dealing with him during the early days of the Maelstrom's rise, when he still carried himself like a noble warlord rather than a tyrant. Officers in the Astra Militarum who studied his tactics and saw, beneath the piracy, the mind of a genius. Even some loyalist space marines, those who fought him during the Badab War and lived, admit he was a commander of rare brilliance. It is whispered in hushed tones that, had he not rebelled, Huron might have risen to become one of the greatest chapter masters of the age, a leader capable of uniting entire regions of the Imperium under coordinated defense doctrine, a general the likes of which the Imperium rarely produces anymore. But that future is dust, replaced by a nightmare of his own making. And yet, even in that nightmare, there is order. That is the paradox of the tyrant. He has done the unthinkable. He has created structure where there should be none. The Red Corsairs are not a horde of maddened traitors. They are a functioning war machine, disciplined in their way, vast in scope, terrifyingly precise. Under Huron's rule, dozens of fragmented warbands, disavowed chapters, and black shields found a purpose, a banner, a voice. He gave them unity, not through faith, through power. Where the Imperium cast them out, he gave them sanctuary. Where chaos offered only madness, he offered command. This, above all, may be his greatest blasphemy, that he has succeeded where the Emperor's vision now struggles to hold. He has built something that lasts, but nothing in this galaxy remains untouched by time or consequence. And so even now there are fractures within Huron's legacy. Quiet ones, dangerous ones. Some of the newer Corsair lords, bred in fire and conquest, have begun to murmur of opportunity, that the Maelstrom is not the limit of their reach, that perhaps it is time to carve something greater. A new empire, a true dominion, not just raiding but ruling, not just terror but transformation. Others whisper of darker things, of changes in the tyrant. They say he speaks less now, relying more on the Hamadria's guidance, retreating deeper into the throne vaults of New Badab, where even his inner circle dares not intrude. Some say he communes with the warp, others say he no longer sleeps. There are those who fear that the man who once spat in the face of chaos may have begun to listen to it, not as a servant, but as a peer. Still his dominion grows. Still his name is spoken not with scorn, but care. In the void docks of renegade forge rights, captains bless their hulls with scrapings from corsair-claimed debris, hoping to draw his favor. In dark markets, artifacts stolen by his raiders fetch obscene prices, trophies from a warlord whose legend walks side by side with infamy. And in the depths of hive-world undercities, rebel cults form not in the name of chaos, but in the name of Huron, not as a god, but as proof that the Imperium can be defied, that the boot on their neck can be broken, that someone, anyone, can rise. And what of the Imperium? It continues, of course. It always does, lumbering, vast, groaning under its own weight. But every sector on the edge of the Maelstrom bleeds resources to fight off Corsair incursions. Every fleet diverted to protect a shipping lane is one less to face the threats beyond the Great Rift. Every moment Huron exists, the Imperium is stretched thinner, and he knows it. That is the genius of his war. He does not have to win outright, he only has to keep fighting. To be a constant wound, a disease the Imperium can never quite cleanse. He has become a strategic inevitability, a part of the grim balance of the 41st millennium. So what then will be his end? Will he fall at last to a loyalist blade, betrayed by one of his own? Will he be consumed by the very warp he has held at bay, torn into demonic glory or screaming madness? Or will he simply vanish, fade into legend, his throne empty, his name becoming more myth than man? Perhaps that is the final weapon in Huron's arsenal. Uncertainty. For even if he dies, the idea of him will remain. The story, the lesson, that even in a galaxy ruled by gods, emperors, and titanic bureaucracies, a man can still carve his name across the stars, with blood, with fire, with will. So, when the void grows quiet, when your systems flicker and your supply lines run dry, when your astropath collapses, screaming a name that hasn't been spoken aloud in years, know this: the tyrant has not been forgotten, because his legacy was never just about power. It was about proving something, that the Imperium is not invincible, that loyalty is a blade that cuts both ways, and that even in the darkest corner of the galaxy, where hope dies screaming, a single man can still make the stars bleed.